Alright, so looking in the image adjustments, this is a 16-bit image here. It was scanned in as a 300 dpi image. I left it as 16-bit. We'll work in it in the 16-bit mode. You can use 8-bit if you want to use more filters, but 16-bit is definitely better quality. It's going to help you out a great deal, especially when you're working with adjustments, doing anything with any type of gradients, any type of tonal range. You want to use the 16-bit. You'll notice the differences in the histogram, and I go over the histogram in great detail in the DVD-ROM training disc. But we'll stick with 16-bit. You'll notice that you have a lot less filters to work with when working with the image when you select it, a lot less. The 16-bit workflow is really going to help you out a lot. We'll keep our history open here, and we'll also work with the histogram, as you can see. That's behind something. And we'll just do that. You can also note the shortcut keys as well. You can add additional shortcut keys for the ones that don't have shortcuts. Alright, you can see I have an all channels view here with the histogram here. And like I said, I go into great detail about how the histogram works and all the details about this. We'll leave the statistics on and we'll leave it in this large view, which is the all channels view instead of the compact or even the expanded view. We get to see all the channels together, including the luminosity and color if we wanted to switch to that. And this is going to display all the different colors, the red, green, and blue, and additional colors that we can work with and overlapping colors. Now the significance of your histogram is it describes the tonal range, the dynamic range of your image. And it's very important when you work with any type of image, graphics, photos, in particular photos. The dynamic range represents the tonal range where you can start from absolute black here to the left and absolute white to the right, and all the pixels in between are going to have a number, or the number of pixels are going to be represented on the graph here, depending on where these pixels lie in the range of darkness to lightness, and then the midtones, of course, in the middle. So absolute black is right over here on the edge here, and absolute white is on the right hand side. And these also deal with your levels. Very important stuff. Anyway, when you have your histogram open, you can see that if things are bunching up here, it's not so bad. It depends on what the image actually needs. You just don't want to clip too much off to the left or to the right. This is already clipping off into the highlights, and that's indicated by the fact that we've blown out our highlights up top here. Alright, so continuing. What we want to do is, normally you would come in and try to select auto color, auto contrast, or maybe even auto levels. Now, these three can be very helpful for you. It depends on what you're trying to do. I go over great shortcuts on how to actually work with auto color, auto contrast, and auto levels. You're going to stick with auto color and auto levels most of the time. But you do want to understand the differences between all three, and this is something we go over in great detail. Alright, so if we selected auto color, like I said, we use this most of the time, well, it fixes the color cast. So there's no color cast here anymore. Now that you take a peek at it, you can see that we have this yellowish color cast around here, around this area, but it's also cast all around here and around here as well. So we could do that. Auto color first before we get started, not a bad idea. If you don't want to fix the color cast, if you want to keep the cast because you like the effect, then by all means do that, keep it. Now I normally would go in and adjust things via the levels, as I will show you in my training program, but for this we'll just do auto color. But now we're going to also do something that's going to help with the shadows and highlights, and that's the new shadow and highlight filter, new to Photoshop CS. We'll take a peek at that. Now just by coming in here, you can see that we already brighten everything up, and we're still very hazy up top here, but things have improved. This is the default setting of 50% shadow. Also note that I'm already looking at the big more options list here. If you didn't want to, you could just uncheck show more options and work with just shadows and highlights and deal with the amounts here. Now also notice the histogram has a before and after. Before was this really big peak here, lots of things approaching black, and then you notice everything here was turning black. That's the problem. So when we get the default shadow and we increase that amount to 50% to improve the shadows, that's going to correct those shadows enough to compensate for the whole picture And then you can see this peak here now becomes this peak here, which is much better. Things are spread out better, but things are still clipping off here. Clipping is when you lose colors that aren't white or aren't black, and then you force them to be black or blacker or white or whiter. And then when they clip, they're clipping off, meaning that they're running off the scale, and they're going to be turned into absolute white. And you can see that's where we lose highlights here. We lose detail there in the highlights here. We're blowing out our highlights. And you can also refresh your histogram like that. And I always have my histogram open. We can just turn this down to 0% and see what we had before. That's no adjustment, no amount of shadow adjustment. And as we go up to 50%, it's going to be reflected right away because we have the preview on. And also you can see the individual channels, how they're affected. Alright, so we'll keep it at 50%, and then we'll adjust those highlights now. And we'll start to bring things in. You can see that things get a lot richer, a lot more detail as we move higher and higher and higher. Now, you can see this area is really getting blown out here, or actually there's no detail in here because the shot had such intense light placed onto this particular area. You can see that this isn't going to improve at all as we slide higher and higher because there's no detail in there to be gained. And what the shadow and highlights are doing, bringing the detail back from the blown out areas. And as you refresh here, you can see the difference. Watch as I slide to the right. Also look at the histogram. It starts to bring those whites, these are the whites, and slides them to the left. And this is representing the range of pixels. If you just click and drag in your histogram, that's how many pixels, if you look at the count here. That's how many pixels are in that area. So this area is 11%, a lot of pixels, still in that white area. But you can see we effectively improved the image quite a lot just by doing that a little bit. Now this image isn't something that is necessarily going to be the best image. It definitely had its deficiencies. That lighting itself right there is very, very bad. It just needs to really be worked on. And the good news is it's like this is empty. There's no detail there. So if you did some healing brush with this area here and then just healed up all this area here, you're not going to get something that's realistic, but at least you're going to be able to change the texture. And then you have to simulate your own type of light here to make that improve. So this is going to require some heavy additional work. But we'll just really throw this up there because you can see it doesn't make a difference. And we'll hit OK here, or you can take a look at more options. You could adjust the color correction here, which is going to add or reduce saturation. Saturation is going to the right, increase the colors like a sponge that's filling up with water or colored water. And then we desaturate towards the left. We're removing color, approaching a grayscale image where we take the colors out. So the sponge is soaking colors out of the picture. So you can look at that either way. Too much saturation, you can see we oversaturate areas here because there is color on the gondolas here. So a little bit of color correction. Contrast, if you want to adjust your contrast, but this can increase a color cast, but it can also have a nice effect, as you can see. Even going up real high, you can do something artistic if you wanted to. Then again, the blacks become very, very black down here, and that doesn't do so well. Normally you don't want to do too much with the contrast here at all, but if you're trying to do something artistic, then by all means you can do that. Like something like that. We'll just stick with the artistic way of doing things. But you see the differences as I slide it. You don't have to do that. And then we hit OK, and we'll stick with something like this.